Famous pianists and their technique. Chapter 13. The Lechetytsky Influence. Summary by Laura Aguirre. Theodor Lechetytsky was a Polish-born pianist. He had moved to Vienna around the age of 11, where he became a pupil of Karl Czerny, and he advanced so quickly that within several years he became a teacher himself, and this was around age 14. In 1850, he was influenced by the technique of a Bohemian pianist named Julius Schulhoff, who I think was part of the Chopin circle, so he kind of had some Chopin style within his playing as well. And Lechetytsky was so impressed by this style because it wasn't what everyone was accustomed to, which at the time was, he says here in a letter, the brilliant technical display that the beauty of the interpretation was not appreciated, that it was completely lost in this brilliance of showy playing. And Lechetytsky thought that Schulhoff had this beautiful touch that he later tried to emulate himself. He then moved to Russia, and there he taught some of Rubinstein's students and became the head of the St. Petersburg Conservatory, where Rubinstein was actually the director. And around 1878, he settled in Vienna, where he devoted the rest of his life to just being a piano teacher. Though he was a good performer, he strictly was just teaching at this point and wasn't doing much performing. The Lechetynsky method. So he taught about 1,800 students, which is a quite massive number of students for this time. Did he have a method? Apparently, he claims he didn't have a method, that he was more concerned with musicianship and interpretation than technique. He said the best study could be done away from the piano. Listening to the inward singing of a phrase was far more valuable than playing it a dozen times. Concentration was one of his key principles to being a good musician. One should not strike a note or a chord without thinking of it and visualizing or sometimes even saying the next one. His most famous student, Paderewski, has a little summary here of what he thought Lechetynsky method was. And he says here, his pupils learn to evoke a fine tone from the instrument and to make music, not noise. There are principles, you will agree, that are to be uniformly inculcated in every pupil. That is, breathe, softness of touch, and precision in rhythm. For the rest, every individual is treated according to his talent. In one word, it is a method of methods. Another pianist named Annette Hula, she also talks about Lechetynsky's concentration method, if you will. And she says here that these are the qualities that you need to have to be a good pianist. First, you need to have an absolutely clear comprehension of the principal points to be studied in the music. You need to have a clear perception of where the difficulties lie and of which way you conquer them. So she said that Lechetynsky would say, decide exactly what it is you want to do in the first place, then how will you do it, then play it. Stop and think if you played it in the way you meant to do it, and only then you can go forward. Without concentration, you can do nothing. Lechetytsky on performance and the individual pianist. He preferred to teach romantic literature simply because it was easier, in a sense, to get the audience emotionally involved. Um, One of his students, Ethel Newcomb, talks about what Lechetytsky told her to not be afraid to express yourself, that the audience wants emotion and expression more than technique, which is very true even today. Much of the audience is not musically educated and they don't know good technique from bad technique, and what they will remember is how beautiful the musician performed. So he was very adamant about talking about this with his students so that they find their own individual expression with the pieces that they were learning. Another student named Beno Malshevich, sorry about that pronunciation there, Lechetytsky, he said that Lechetytsky never taught two students the same piece the same way. He made us think of the shape of the phrase, of the paragraph, of the composition. The student had freedom of individual interpretation. So individual is the key word here, that each student, maybe they're learning the same piece, but would have to, would interpret it therefore differently. It proceeds here to talk about Lechetynsky's method, which is no method. Apparently, I guess some people were insistent on, I guess, having a set of rules that he was following, and he said no, that he had no rules, And he says here, how is it possible one should have them? One pupil needs this, another that. The hand of each differs, the brain of each differs. And this made me think of even today as a teacher myself. I have 150 students at the school I teach at and 25 kids in each class. And let me tell you, it is very true. Everyone's brain is different. Some kids learn better this way, that. And one of the big things about teaching, they teach us about the different learners, types of learners, visual, kinesthetic, auditory. So Lechetisky was onto something here in the sense of how could you give everyone the exact same method when everyone's different? So I agree with him on that. He did say, of course, that yes, he taught the basics of correct hand position and wrist movement and so forth. So it wasn't that he wasn't teaching proper sitting at the piano, but he would kind of cater to each individual student and their needs. As the chapter goes on, it's safe to say that Lechetinski was very adamant still about not claiming a certain method, and he would say here that method depends on the person you have before you. So not one thing works for every single person the same way. However, in 1902, he had two assistants that tried to put into words what Lechetinski did as a professor, as a teacher, and what they felt were his methods and their experience. And the first book here is The Groundwork of the Lechetinski Method by Malwine Bree. And Lechetinski did actually approve this book. He said here, I declare your book to be the sole authorized publication explanatory of my method and wish it all success and popularity. So he actually was very happy with this publication. 2 months later, there was another book written by Marie Pretner, and it's titled The Modern Pianist, Being My Experiences in the Technique and Execution of Pianoforte Playing According to the Principles of Professor Theodor Lechetinski. He, however, did not approve this book. It doesn't explain why in the chapter. I'm not sure if he just didn't like what was in it or if it sounded too much like the groundwork book. Who knows? But he did approve the first book, and this book was 100 pages long. There was 28 sections of verbal text and exercise material, and there were topics on performance and practice. Our book has some examples of the groundwork of the Lechetinski method, and they've kind of selected some of the sections from the groundwork book. For example, here we have attitude at the piano, and here he talks about details on how to sit properly at the piano, how to play with a graceful attitude. He even goes as far as to talk about keeping your nails trimmed and the rounded hand position. Of course, you can only really achieve that with trimmed nails. Also, he talks about wrist exercise. Hands remain rounded, fingers retain their position, wrists does not raise higher than the original position, and the upper arm does not follow the wrist motion. Here on number 4, some general rules are he talks about finger touch, curvature of fingers, that they should not be stretching outward, and that we should focus on the fingertip when playing. Styles of touch. Strength of the fingers needs to be reinforced by wrist pressure for desired singing tone. And he mentions here legato in a cantalina style. Also, he talks about chords, how we should play the chords, press, not strike the keys. There should be no stiff wrist to avoid tiring of the hands. And you should prepare your hand for the chord leaps, so already have the measurement in mind of how you're going to reach to the chord. And then lastly here they have another example talking about movement of the hand and the arm. This is to help with the execution of phrases and support the rhythm and resting the hand after tension of forte playing. So once again, talking about how not to fatigue yourself while performing. The chapter finishes by saying that this Lechetinski method, the groundwork of Lechetinski, is nothing really groundbreaking, nothing new. There was nothing new in this text that stood out in the piano technique world. So he talks about things that were mentioned before, and it even states here that Czerny and Hummel's method books probably have more information, more useful things that a pianist could use. Lechetinski does focus on curved hand position, vertical fingers, low wrists. That's his big thing. But he fails to mention anything about arm weight. So who knows if he really did talk about it with his students. Now remember, this is Bree's writings, so it's only from that person's point of view, since Lechetinski did not write it himself. The picture on the left there is an example of what's inside the book. You see some exercises there, and as well as some pictures on probably hand position, fingering position for the passages there. What can we say was Lecetinsky's main contribution to piano pedagogy? Well, he definitely focused on musical expression and tone quality, and he instilled that in all of his students. Versus technique wasn't really known too much for his technique method, but then again, he never really wanted to record what his method was. So we can give him credit though of how he was able to really show the importance of making the music beautiful and pleasing the audience as well as the performer. Everyone should be enjoying the music. And forgive me, I think I've been pronouncing his name 3 different ways this whole presentation, so it's Lechetitsky. There's no N in there. Let me conclude here with some aphorisms, and this is kind of aphorisms by him, that this is kind of evidence that he really was focused on fingerings and how your fingers are shaped on the piano and the importance of this. So one of them here is, your fingers are like capering horses, spirited and willing, but ignorant of where to go without a guide. Put on your bridle and curb them in till they learn to obey you, or they will not serve you well. And lastly, we have this one. If you want to develop strength and sensitiveness in the tips of your fingers, use them in everyday life. For instance, when you go out for a walk, hold your umbrella with the tips instead of with the palm of your hand.